The invitation wasn't meant for her. It had been lying near the gate of the community shelter, crumpled and dirt-stained, as if tossed away by someone who didn't care. She picked it up while sweeping the front steps, not thinking much of it until she saw the golden edges and the embossed seal of the city's grandest gala. For a moment, she just stared at it, tracing the letters with her finger. The names inside belonged to people who lived a world away from hers: business owners, politicians, and people who never had to worry about the price of bread or a leaking roof. She laughed quietly, shaking her head. What business did she have there? Yet that night, as she sat in the shelter kitchen helping serve soup to the homeless, the image of that golden paper stayed in her mind. It wasn't the glamour that drew her, it was the thought of what that world represented: comfort, pride, and a kind of blindness to everything outside their shining walls. She wondered what would happen if someone like her walked in, someone whose hands carried the marks of hard work, whose clothes smelled faintly of detergent and rain, whose life was made of small sacrifices instead of luxury. Would they look away? Would they laugh? Or would they finally see? She placed the invitation on her table that night, the soft glow of her lamp catching its edges. It looked almost magical there, like a door waiting to be opened. She knew it wasn't hers to use, yet something deep inside whispered that maybe, just maybe, it had found the right person after all. The idea grew quietly over the next few days, whispering to her while she folded donated clothes, while she comforted an old man who had nowhere to sleep. The Gala was a place of gold and glass. Her world was of worn fabric and quiet strength, but maybe they needed to meet just once. Maybe someone needed to remind them that value doesn't wear silk or diamonds. Sometimes it wears hope. On the morning of the Gala, she looked at her reflection in the mirror, tired eyes, soft smile, steady hands, and made her decision. She would go, not for the lights or the music, but to stand there as herself. She didn't know what she would say or do, or if they would even let her in, but something about that forgotten invitation felt like a test, not from the world, but from fate. So, she placed it carefully inside her pocket, took a deep breath, and whispered to herself, "Let them see what they never notice." That single thought filled her with both fear and courage. She didn't know it yet, but the moment she decided to walk through those doors, the night end, every person inside that hall was about to change forever. The morning sun crept through her small window, lighting up the folded invitation on the table. Today was the day of the gala. She stared at it while tying her worn shoes, wondering if she was foolish to even think about going. Still, the thought of standing among people who never noticed lives like hers filled her with a strange determination. She left early, walking through the streets with a small hope tucked in her chest. Her first stop was a thrift shop at the corner. The owner smiled kindly when she explained what she needed, but as they searched through racks of faded dresses, nothing seemed right. Some were torn, others too large or too bright, and none made her feel like herself. She thanked him and kept walking. The next few stores were no different: clothes, too fancy, too broken, or simply too far from what her heart wanted. She wasn't looking for beauty. She was looking for meaning. Hours passed, and the city grew louder as evening approached. Her feet ached, and her hope began to fade. She returned to the shelter with only the evening wind for company, feeling both tired and restless. Inside, the familiar smell of detergent and old wood wrapped around her. She sat on the floor beside the pile of donations, surrounded by clothes meant for others, not her. Her eyes fell on the black plastic trash bag she used every day, plain, shiny, and always reliable. For a long moment, she just stared at it. The idea arrived slowly, almost like a whisper. What if she didn't borrow beauty from others? What if she created her own? The thought felt wild and impossible, but also strangely right. She picked up the bag, spread it on the floor, and began to work. With a pair of scissors and a few safety pins, she cut, folded, and tied, her hands moving with quiet focus. The The sound of plastic rustling filled the small room as she shaped it carefully, layer by layer. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but as she stood up and looked in the cracked mirror, something inside her shifted. The reflection staring back wasn't polished or wealthy, but strong. The dress was simple, odd, and bold, just like the message she wanted to carry. She smiled faintly, realizing that this wasn't about a gown or a party. It was about walking into a place where she didn't belong and daring to be seen anyway. The bag that once carried other people's forgotten clothes now carried her courage. As the last light of day faded outside, she gathered her hair, straightened the rough edges of her dress, and looked at herself one last time. She didn't see someone poor or unworthy. She saw someone with purpose. The world might laugh when she walked in, but that didn't matter. Because tonight, she wasn't just going to a gala. She was going to make them remember what true value looks like. The city lights shimmered like stars brought down to earth as she stepped out into the night, the cool air brushing against her skin. The streets were alive with cars, laughter, and the distant sound of music. Yet she felt like she was walking through another world. In her black plastic dress, every reflection from the shop windows caught her eye, reminding her of what she was about to do. Her shoes were old and thin, their soles whispering softly against the pavement, but she walked as if they were made of gold. Each step was heavy with doubt, yet pushed forward by something stronger purpose. Her heart thudded in her chest, not from fear of mockery, but from the weight of what she represented. She wasn't going for herself. She was going for the people who swept the streets after the parties ended, for the ones who stood outside store windows wishing for warmth, for the faces no one ever turned to see. The streets grew brighter the closer she came to the hall. Elegant cars lined the road, each one gleaming under the streetlights. Men in suits and women in shining gowns stepped out gracefully, their laughter echoing like music she wasn't supposed to hear. She paused near the corner, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the makeshift straps of her dress. A small group nearby glanced her way, whispering, eyes narrowing in confusion before looking away with dismissive smiles. She took a deep breath and kept walking. Every heartbeat felt louder than the city itself, but her steps didn't falter. She could see the entrance, now tall glass doors glowing with golden light. It looked like the world she'd always watched from afar, unreachable and untouchable. For a brief moment, she wondered if she should turn back. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe they'd laugh, or worse, ask her to leave before she could even speak. But then she remembered the shelter, the tired faces, the grateful smiles, the people who believed kindness was something rare. She couldn't turn back now. She walked past the security guards, her eyes calm but her pulse racing. They looked her up and down, puzzled, as she reached into her pocket and pulled out the golden invitation. Their hesitation hung in the air before one of them stepped aside and nodded her in. The grand doors opened, flooding her in light so bright it made her blink. The sound of music, laughter, and clinking glasses washed over her like a wave. For a second, she stood still, her breath caught between fear and wonder. And then, slowly, she stepped inside. Every head would soon turn toward her, but in that moment, she didn't know how deeply this walk, this quiet, trembling walk through the glowing streets was about to change not just her life, but the hearts of everyone waiting beyond those shining doors. The moment she stepped through the grand doors, the air in the ballroom shifted as if the entire room had taken one sharp breath. The chandeliers above sparkled like frozen stars, their light glinting off diamonds, silverware, and polished shoes, but all that brilliance dimmed when every eye turned toward her. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, laughter faded into uneasy silence, and in that stillness, the sound of her quiet footsteps on the marble floor echoed louder than the music that had just been playing. The sight of her was unlike anything they had expected, a woman in a dress made from a black trash bag, its plastic folds catching the light in strange, glossy ripples. At first, A few people chuckled softly, thinking it was some kind of statement, a strange new art piece meant to shock. Others frowned, whispering behind their jeweled hands, wondering how she had even made it past the door. The photographers, always hungry for the unusual, raised their cameras and began clicking rapidly, capturing the moment that no one yet understood. But she didn't flinch. Her posture was steady, her chin slightly lifted, her eyes calm. She looked around the grand hall, not with arrogance, but with quiet knowing, as if she had expected this reaction all along. Her heart was pounding, but her steps were smooth and unhurried. Every click of a camera, every whisper in the corner, every nervous laugh seemed to fade as she kept walking, the long black fabric of her handmade dress moving softly with each step. In her hand, she carried a small bag, old and worn, but she held it like it contained something precious. Some thought it must be her purse, others assumed it was part of her strange outfit. But what was inside that bag mattered more than anyone in that glittering room could imagine. A woman in pearls leaned toward her companion and whispered something sharp. A man in a velvet suit smirked, shaking his head. Still, she didn't break her calm. She didn't look away or rush to explain herself. She simply walked deeper into the golden light, moving past tables draped in silk, past the polished glasses and expensive perfume, as if she belonged there just as much as anyone else. The orchestra faltered for a brief second before the conductor lifted his hand again and the music hesitantly resumed. Yet, the energy in the room remained strange and easy-charged, curious. There was something about her that made it impossible to look away. The quiet strength in her eyes, the steady rhythm of her steps, the way she carried that simple bag as if it held a secret the world had forgotten. She reached the center of the hall, paused, and looked around once more. The whispers grew softer then, replaced by something else, an unfamiliar silence filled with wonder. No one knew who she was, or why she was there, but everyone could feel it. This moment was not an accident. It was the beginning of something they would never forget. As she walked slowly past the glittering tables, the soft hum of whispers followed her like a shadow. People leaned closer to one another, voices low but urgent, their curiosity mixing with disbelief. Some thought she must be a performer perhaps, part of the evening's entertainment, sent to make a statement about fashion or class. Others guessed she was an activist, a rebel making a scene in the middle of luxury. A few laughed softly, thinking it was a strange kind of publicity stunt. But the longer she stood there, the harder it was for anyone to place her in any box. There was something about her calm face, the quiet way she moved, that didn't fit any of their stories. She didn't speak. She didn't try to explain herself. Instead, she simply smiled, a soft, peaceful smile that made even the harshest whispers fade for a moment. Her eyes drifted to the stage, where the evening's host, a well-dressed man with a practiced smile, had paused mid-sentence. The microphone in his hand trembled slightly as he tried to decide what to do. He looked toward the organizers, who gestured nervously, unsure whether to call security or ignore her presence. But when his gaze met hers, something inside him shifted. There was no trace of defiance in her expression, no embarrassment, no plea for attention. Her eyes were steady, calm, almost comforting. It was as if she carried a silence that spoke louder than words. The host hesitated, then slowly lowered the microphone, clearing his throat to buy time. The audience waited, some craning their necks for a better look, others whispering theories that grew wilder by the second. But she didn't move. She stood near the edge of the stage, the soft light catching the dark sheen of her makeshift dress, making it look almost elegant despite its origin. Her hands were steady around the small bag she carried, her fingers gently brushing its worn edges as if drawing strength from it. A woman at the front table whispered to her husband, "She must have a message." He nodded, pretending to understand, though confusion clouded his eyes. In truth, no one in that grand hall understood what was happening, They only knew they couldn't look away. The host finally spoke again, his voice softer now, unsure. "Welcome, ma'am. Can we help you?" he asked carefully. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then she simply shook her head, her smile never fading. It wasn't the smile of someone seeking attention. It was the kind of smile that said, she already knew. Something they didn't. The kind that made people stop and think before judging. The murmur softened into uneasy silence, and for the first time that night, the air in the hall felt different, less proud, more human. The host hesitated again, torn between his duty and a strange feeling that told him not to interrupt her presence. So, he didn't. He stepped back, and the crowd, sensing his uncertainty, fell quiet too. No one could explain it, but somehow, her stillness spoke louder than any speech that night. The room seemed to hold its breath, as she took a small step toward the stage, her hand slightly trembling but her gaze unwavering. The host hesitated, unsure whether to stop her or to let her speak, but something in her calm expression made him extend the microphone toward her, without a word. She accepted it carefully, her fingers brushing against his in a brief, silent exchange that said more than either could have spoken. For a moment, the sound system buzzed softly, and all eyes were on her, this woman in a dress made from a trash bag, standing beneath the glittering lights of a room filled with the city's wealthiest. Her voice was quiet at first, fragile like it might break under the weight of so many stares. "This bag," she began, pausing as her voice quivered. A few people shifted in their seats, expecting awkwardness, but instead, she drew in a breath and lifted her chin slightly, her words growing stronger with every syllable. "This bag once held the clothes of the forgotten," she said, her voice echoing gently through the hall. "People who dream of being seen, just once. People who pass us on the street, and we don't even notice." A hush fell deeper over the room. The sound of champagne glasses setting down on tables, the faint rustle of silk, all faded into nothing. Her tone was not angry, not bitter. It carried something deeper, something honest. "I wear it," she continued, placing a hand on the dark folds of plastic, "to remind us that worth isn't worn, it's lived." For a moment, her eyes moved slowly over the crowd, meeting the gaze of people who had spent lifetimes hiding their flaws behind diamonds and perfect smiles. No one looked away this time. The words hit something real, something they didn't want to feel, but couldn't ignore. The same people who had laughed when she entered now sat in silence, their expressions softening as if seeing her and, perhaps themselves, in a different light. The host, standing just behind her, felt a strange heaviness in his chest, the kind that comes when truth cuts through the noise of comfort. She wasn't there to accuse anyone or to make a scene. She was there to remind them of something they had all forgotten: humanity. The lights above shimmered against her dark dress, turning it into something almost beautiful. It was no longer a trash bag, was a symbol, a mirror, a quiet rebellion against everything that hall represented. When she finished speaking, she lowered the microphone slowly, her hands steady now, her eyes shining not with pride, but with peace. The room was utterly still. Not a single camera clicked. Not a single whisper rose. It wasn't silence born of judgment anymore. It was the silence that comes when people see truth standing right in front of them and realize they have no words big enough to answer it. The room remained silent as she gently placed the microphone back on its stand. Her eyes moved across the sea of stunned faces, people, frozen in their seats, unsure of how to respond. But she wasn't done yet. Slowly, she reached for the small black bag she had been holding since she entered, the one everyone had assumed was just part of her strange outfit. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unzipped it, the sound echoing faintly in the grand, glittering hall. A few people leaned forward, curious, expecting jewelry, a hidden prop, or perhaps some form of protest. But what she pulled out was far simpler and far more powerful. The first thing she placed on the nearest table was a small envelope, worn at the edges, with childish handwriting on the front. Then another, and another, letters, dozens of them each, neatly folded, tied with pieces of ribbon or string. "These," she said softly, her voice carrying across the hall, "are thank you notes from children. From the shelters. From the places you don't see." She unfolded one and read aloud a few words written in bright crayon. "Thank you for the warm blanket. I feel safe now." A hush deeper than before fell over the room. Then she pulled out a stack of photographs, faces of children laughing in patched-up clothes, volunteers cooking meals, people embracing under dim lights. There were drawings, 2 simple ones, colored in shaky lines. A house, a sun, 2 hands holding each other. She placed each item carefully on the long table meant for donations. The one covered in gold decorations and glittering envelopes filled with checks from the city's elite. The contrast was striking. The simplicity of those letters and drawings against the polished marble and crystal chandeliers. "These," she continued, her tone calm but full of quiet emotion, "are the real treasures of our city. Not the buildings, not the titles, not the wealth, but the hearts that keep giving, even when they have nothing left." Some guests lowered their eyes, unable to meet her gaze. A woman in a jeweled gown dabbed at her eyes. The host, still standing by the stage, swallowed hard, his earlier hesitation melting into respect. The woman in the trash bag dress didn't raise her voice or demand applause. She simply arranged the photos and letters like precious artifacts, treating them with the care one might give to diamonds. For a moment, she stood still, looking down at the memories spread before her, proof of unseen kindness, of quiet lives that mattered. Then she smiled faintly, as if she could hear the laughter of those children echoing faintly through the grand hall. It was a strange and beautiful sight, this woman who owned nothing, standing among those who owned everything, reminding them of what true wealth looked like. And as she stepped back from the table, the silence that followed was no longer cold, it was heavy, full of realization, the kind that stays with a person long after the night ends. For a moment, the grand hall was completely still, as if time itself had paused to breathe. The woman stood quietly beside the table, where the letters and photographs lay spread out like fragile pieces of truth. No one spoke, no one moved. Then, slowly, something began to shift. It started with one soft clap, hesitant, unsure, but genuine. Another followed, then another, until the sound grew into a wave of applause that filled every corner of the glittering room. The same people who had whispered, laughed, and rolled their eyes when she entered, now rose to their feet. Their applause was not the kind given to a performer. It was softer, humbler, carrying something raw and real respect. Some clapped with trembling hands, others with eyes glistening as they realized what her quiet courage had done. She didn't bow, didn't bask in the attention. Instead, she simply looked out at them, her expression calm but warm, as if she understood their hearts were beginning to open. Near the front, a woman in a silver gown stepped forward, her mascara smudged from tears. She didn't bother to hide. I want to help," she said in a voice that broke slightly. "Tell me where to send supplies. Food, clothes, whatever they need." Her sincerity broke the fragile barrier that had kept others still. A man in a perfectly tailored suit stood next, unfastened his expensive watch, and placed it gently on the donation table. "For the children," he said quietly. One by one, more people moved forward. Jewelry, wallets, envelopes, even handwritten pledges began to pile beside the simple treasures the woman had brought. No one was showing off now. There was no competition, no performancy, just an overwhelming desire to give, to do something good. The host, who had once hesitated to let her speak, wiped his eyes before stepping to the microphone again. "Tonight," he said softly, "we were supposed to celebrate success. But maybe this right here's what success truly looks like." The audience nodded, some holding hands, others simply staring at the woman as though seeing her for the first time. The mood in the room had transformed completely. The arrogance that once filled the air had dissolved, replaced by something fragile and human empathy. Even the lights seemed softer, their golden glow falling over the woman's makeshift dress, turning the plastic shimmer into something beautiful. She didn't smile broadly or make a speech. She just whispered, "Thank you," her voice barely audible, but full of meaning. And in that moment, everyone understood that the gala had changed forever. It was no longer just an event for the wealthy, it had become a reminder that compassion could rise from anywhere, even from a woman who had walked in with nothing but courage, a trash bag, and a heart full of truth. The night slowly drew to a close, but no one in that grand hall wanted to leave just yet. The chandeliers still sparkled above, though their light felt softer now, warmer somehow, as if the room itself had changed. The woman stood quietly near the entrance, the same spot where hours ago she had hesitated before stepping inside. Her dress, made from a trash bag, was slightly crinkled from the long evening, but now it seemed to carry a strange beauty, a quiet grace that no designer could have created. Guests began to approach her one by one, no longer out of curiosity, but gratitude. They didn't see her as an intruder anymore. They saw her as someone who had reminded them of something. They had all forgotten the power of simple kindness. A woman in pearls reached out to squeeze her hand, whispering, "You changed tonight." A man in a dark suit bowed his head slightly, saying, "You made us remember what this was supposed to be about." She smiled softly each time, offering no long speeches or thanks, just a nod, a kind word, a quiet humility that seemed to touch people even more deeply than her earlier words. Around the room, laughter had turned gentle, conversations softer. People were no longer discussing business or luxury brands, but plans for donation drives, new programs for shelters, ideas to bring hope to the forgotten corners of the city. Even the orchestra, who had played grand, showy tunes earlier, began a slow, calm melody, filling the air with a peace that seemed to wrap around everyone present. The host approached her last, his face no longer formal but thoughtful. "You know," he said, "I've hosted this event for 10 years, and tonight was the first time it actually meant something." She looked up at him, her eyes calm but shining. "Sometimes," she said softly, "it just takes a little truth to wake people up." They stood there in silence for a moment, the sound of quiet conversation behind them like a hum of renewed purpose. As the guests began to leave, many paused by the donation table, adding one last envelope, note, or promise. The pile of treasures she had brought, letters, drawings, photos, remained in the center, untouched, as if sacred. When the final guests had gone, she stood alone by the door, watching the lights dim. The hall, once a place of glitter and ego, now felt human, real, alive. She adjusted the edge of her makeshift dress, looked once more at the table of memories, and smiled faintly. She hadn't come for applause or attention. She had come to remind people that kindness still existed that it could start anywhere, even with a woman in a trash bag who believed that worth wasn't measured by what one wore, but by what one gave. Weeks passed, but the memory of that night refused to fade. The city that once celebrated only glamour and success now whispered a different kind of story. The story of the woman who walked into a glittering gala, wearing a dress made from a trash bag, and left every heart changed. Photos of her began to appear in newspapers and online, but not as gossip or ridicule. The images showed her standing by the donation table, surrounded by the letters, photos, and drawings she had brought from the shelter. People shared her words across the city. Worth isn't worn, it's lived. For many, those words became a quiet reminder of humility, a lesson about what truly mattered. But while the world talked about her, she didn't chase the attention. She returned to the shelter, where the air smelled faintly of soup and clean laundry, and where the same familiar faces greeted her with tired but hopeful smiles. She worked the same way. She always had folding clothes, serving meals, and listening to stories from people who had nowhere else to go. Sometimes, children would tug on her sleeve and ask if she was really the lady from the gala, and she would just smile and say, "Maybe, but tonight, I'm just here to help." Meanwhile, something remarkable began to happen in the city. The gala organizers, moved by the unforgettable evening, decided to start a new tradition. They called it the Night of Heart. It wasn't a night for diamonds or designer gowns. Anymore, it was a night for giving. The same people who once competed for attention now competed to outdo each other in kindness. Every year, the event raised enough to fund shelters, food drives, and educational programs. The stage where she once stood had been transformed into a platform for hope. But she'll never return to that stage. She didn't need to. Her presence was there in spirit, in every act of compassion that followed. One evening, after a long day at the shelter, she walked past a dusty mirror hanging in the hallway. She caught her reflection and paused. The light was dim, and the years of work had left faint lines on her face, but her eyes still carried that same calm strength. For a moment, she saw not the woman she was now, but the one who had stood in that grand hall, afraid, yet brave, trembling yet unshaken. A soft smile touched her lips. That night had not been about her. It had been about everyone who needed to be seen, about every act of kindness waiting to be noticed. She turned away from the mirror and went back to her work, the faint hum of laughter filling the shelter around her. The world might have remembered her as a symbol, but to her, it was simple. She had only worn a trash bag and spoken the truth. Yet somehow, that truth had become a legacy that would live in every heart she had touched.